Live, and we're live. There we go.
Yeah.
What's up, guys? Welcome, George. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing real well. I sure appreciate you having me on, Rich. I'm a huge fan of the show, and obviously I'm a big fan of your content and Rolo's content. So I'm really happy to be here. It's an honor to be on the broadcast with you.
Awesome. So, some guys don't know who you are, and you're a car guy. You're a red pill economist. You know a lot about the ladies too. You've got some interesting friends like Robert Kiyosaki. You run a cool conference. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard a lot of stories about it. But um, I'm going to start from the get-go here and just say, guys, you want to go subscribe to his channel. So it's hyperlinked in the title of the video. But what's like your Batman origin story? Like what Batcave did you come out of to create this like red pill economist, supercar driving, like capitalist dude?
Well, that's a good question. I just out of college, I just was like, well, let's just start a business, and I tried to start a t-shirt business because it was the only thing I could kind of think to do. And at the time, I was living in Vegas, and so I didn't know anything about it. But I'm like, well, I'll just set this up, and I need a gig that I can work nights. So I can allocate the days to kind of building the little t-shirt business. And so I got a gig working at the Golden Nugget, valet, in fact, at the Golden Nugget down in Vegas. So I was working graveyard, 4 graveyards every week.
How old
So
were you then?
I was in like my mid-20s, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a t-shirt business in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't go anywhere. I lost money, but that was the first kind of trial balloon.
Let me
And
just
then
kind of ask you a question about like moving physical products, because I always get like people always ask me business questions. They have a business idea. I've had people do one-on-one consults with me with physical product businesses often. Like, what's your take on moving t-shirts? Doesn't matter what it is, t-shirts, trinkets, nutraceuticals, like anything physical.
it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Now it is. You got to keep in mind this was back in the 90s, and
margins are a lot slimmer now.
Yeah, you didn't have the opportunity with digital products that you have now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what we do or what I do on YouTube is a great example of that. I just started the Rebel Capitalist show, the podcast, at the beginning of 2020, and I started the George Gammon YouTube channel in the latter stages of 2019. And you grow it to a brand to where now you can sell at a live event with 700 attendees, or I've got a membership program called Rebel Capitalist Pro.
Mm-hmm.
We've got over 800 subscribers for that, and that's just an opportunity that was not there in the mid 90s when I got into the game. Even in the early 2000s, when I kind of figured out what not to do by having failed so many times. And then I started to make a substantial amount of money with the entrepreneurial ventures. But even back then, you kind of had to have a brick and mortar location. I remember the first business that I started that did really well, I had about 100 grand saved up, and I borrowed 400 because you needed 500 to start the business and have enough runway to where you could start having positive cash flow. And now, and then I grew that business to a point where it was making, maybe $1 million a year or something like that. But the thing is, now you can create that same type of income with $500, with 1,000. And it's true.
It's never been easier to make money, I think.
It never has been. Now that said, the barrier of entry is a lot lower.
Low.
But if you have something that makes what you do unique, and if you have an edge, then it's going to be tough for people to compete with you because they can't replicate what you do.
Yeah,
and
content is king, right? I mean, like you probably see people in your space, when you talk about economics, that just haven't got a clue what they're doing. And it's like, like, did you even have a day job anywhere close to this space at one point? Or is this just shit you're making up because you read an article on Twitter?
Don't have a clue what they're doing, Rich.
Yeah.
So the people in the central banks don't have a clue. So
yeah, I want to talk about your views on economy too. But hey, let me ask this question, because I asked Aaron Clary this, as well when I was chatting with him on my live. And Do you think it's easier to find that one true love, like that one kind of perfect girl to be a partner in your life, or is it easier to make a business that throws off $1 million a year in revenue?
Well, I don't know what's easiest. I know what path you should take. That's easy.
So it's a two-part question now. So which one do you think is easier, making $1 million a year or the girl? And which path should you take?
You got to make the $1 million, because then you'll get both.
Right.
And if you're not out there trying to make the $1 million, then even if you get hooked up with a great gal, you're gonna lose her. And I'm not saying that it's all about money. That's not what I'm saying there. But what I am saying is that guys have to have that ambition.
How did you get red pilled, by the way?
Well,
like, was it a girl? Was it disappointment?
No.
Like, was it just a sequence of events? Like,
No,
what brought you to the red pill? Like, what brought you to Rolo stuff and seeing my stuff?
Well, I've been single since college.
Yeah.
And I've you want to use the term spinning plates or whatever,
Right.
And even prior to that, even when I was in grade school and high school, I that was never a problem for me as far as we'll say getting a date.
Right.
That's never really an issue. And then I played a lot of sports and I was athletic, and I just it's just we'll just leave it at that. It was never an issue.
Okay.
And then I started to make quite a bit of money, and so then it became even easier than it was before. And before it was very, very.
How old
easy.
were you when you made your first million?
I was a self-made millionaire at 34.
Cool.
And so,
and you're how old now?
48.
Oh shit, you're almost the same age as me, man. You're like, you're exactly the same age as me.
Yeah. So so it was never an issue. And what was fascinating, must have been 2007 or something like that. And I never watched TV, but I stumbled across Mystery's show.
Mm-hmm.
Remember?
Mystery Method.
No, well, his show first. I stumbled across his show. Remember?
The one where he walked around the platforms with the painted fingernails and the big hat and all that.
Yeah, and he'd show the nerdy kids, what they were doing wrong and stuff. What the heck was it called? The Lovable Loser or something. I don't know what it was. Yeah. But anyway, I saw that show that he had on VH1, and I was immediately interested by it. I'm like, well, this is kind of a fascinating concept. and then I started to listen to the psychology behind what he was talking about. And I'm like, wait a minute, this makes sense, because this aligns with all of the experience I have had with women up to that point. And not just me, but my buddies in college. You've got some buddies in college that
it's weird.
Are like
it's
Brad Pitt.
It's
then
like
you got
seeing
other
the code in the Matrix. Like, you see how everything works.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing like the summary, you see like the full equation to get to the summary.
Yeah, and when I saw what he was teaching the nerdy kids or whatever, and how that was all the guys that I knew in college and in high school, for that matter, that just had women just flock to them just naturally. That's how they were. That was just their normal personality. When he was talking about negging or something like that, or it was just the way they naturally were. They came from a mindset. I don't know what's first, the chicken or the egg, but they would come from a mindset of total abundance when it comes to women, and instead of this scarcity mindset. And because they always felt as though there was just an abundance, and they always had an abundance. When they were texting, or back in the day, paging or whatever, when they were talking to the gals around them.
That really dates you when you talk about paging. So for those of you that are watching this that are in like the core of my demographic, they've probably never heard of pagers. We used to carry around these little boxes on our belt, and they would buzz with a number on top of it. And it was usually, somebody was calling you to call you back at that number so they could get you.
Right, or you could check your voicemail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what Mystery was talking about, I'm like, that's all the guys that I know where this came very easy. This is just how they are naturally. So it kind of went from a subconscious thing to a conscious thing. And then he just kind of made it a science. But that's what really fascinated me. And then, but the key component that he was missing is he obviously tells you, how to interact when you first meet a gal. and that's going to be beneficial if you don't know what you're doing. But then once you start to date the gal, that's when you have to read Rolo stuff. Because if you just have mystery stuff, let's say if you just have game without the red pill stuff, you're still not going to.
Children with dynamite. You're going to screw up and cause problems. Hey,
Yeah,
you've never been married. You said you've never had a long-term relationship, so you've mostly been a lifetime plate spinner. I mean, did you ever get what stopped you from inviting a woman into your life on a more intimate basis?
I think there's a lot of things. First and foremost, when I got out of college, I knew that well, you don't have the conscious thought. I was just hardcore entrepreneur. That's all I wanted to do is make money. I just really
Did you have an icon that you followed, like somebody that inspired you?
What's that?
Did you have an icon that you followed, like somebody that inspired you to become an entrepreneur? Like, I want to be that guy.
No,
not even that.
No, I wanted to make money, and I wanted to figure out ways to make money. And once I got my claws into something, I've been like this my whole life. I get very OCD.
Yeah.
And so it can be good and it can be bad, but I'd get into a business and I just get tunnel vision where I wouldn't date. I mean, I'd go out with gals here and there, but it wasn't even part of my conscious thought for a long periods of time when I was just hyper focused on building a business, as an example. So, there's a lot of things that go into it. I've always been very independent.
And you saw women as getting in the way of that goal, like they distract you from it or take you away from it, or?
Well, I think you can definitely allow that to happen, where gals can be. I think for 99% of guys out there, they're a huge distraction because they allocate so much time and energy into pursuing women. When if they would just take that same time and energy into pursuing their business or pursuing excellence, like you say, the women would fall into place. See, that's what guys don't understand. They think that they actively have to pursue women. And it's not the case. If you pursue other things and if you pursue personal growth and professional growth, then you don't have to pursue the women. They'll pursue you.
It's 4 words: chase excellence, not women.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. I mean, if you can do that well, and when women start coming into your life, you don't screw it up by being a total simp or like a plugged in beta. It's not hard and it's fun.
Yeah, and the magic to what you just said is not only if you're single, but if you are in a relationship, it's just as applicable, if not more so. Because
there's a lot of guys with a lot of money out there, and I'm sure you see a lot of them too, that have been very successful. They put a dent in the universe. They've built some kind of world-class product or service. They've changed people's lives. Things have improved, and they have a massive store of value of it, with AKA money, as a result of that. But they just suck so bad with women, man. Like, they've been through multiple marriages. They have just women that they just bend the knee to completely, even though they're like champions of their craft.
I'm not going to mention any names, but you and I both know people that I'm very, very good friends with that would admit that they fall into that category to a great degree.
Happens to a lot of men, man. And I wish I could talk to more of those guys, right? Like, I talk to a lot of dudes, but those guys would have the biggest effect because of what they do in their lives with their businesses.
Yeah, it's unbelievable that they can be so I don't know if alpha is the right word in their business life, yet be so beta in their personal life.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I've never
it's a huge risk.
That is, I think, the majority of guys that are like, because the majority of the guys have this idea of what women want, and it's just completely skewed for whatever reason. They think that, well, women want you to just constantly compliment them and constantly buy them chocolates and roses and constantly just to defer to them to every single decision you make. And what they don't understand, is that's not the way it works. That's not what they want. And I think even gals who are honest, if you say, hey, would you want a guy who behaves this way or this way? They would say, no, that other. If they're too sappy, if they're too over the top, it's just a complete turnoff. But it's not to say that you have to be a jerk or you have to be an asshole. That's really, and see,
you figured it
guys
out.
take it too far,
Mhm.
and then they become a jerk. You've got to be this even kind of right in the middle, I think. And not to be cliche, but if you look at like a James Bond type figure, how you're in control, you've maintained frame, to use your term, but at the same time you're a gentleman. When you're in the presence of that gal, you're an extreme gentleman, but you're calling the shots, and you are someone that any woman would look up to and actually respect. And I think women respect ambition, and they also respect a guy that's a decision maker, that is a leader of other men, that can solve problems, and that can take control of a situation, while at the same time someone that's going to treat them well.
Yeah.
And guys just
James Bond
conflate
is like
all
the
of those things
perfect
and don't get
avatar
it.
for that. I think you really, hit the nail on the head, because I've talked to a lot of guys now privately that are seasoned gentlemen, and I think the James Bond avatar is probably the best way to accurately define that. You want to aim for a target, aim for that. It's not a bad target to aim for.
Yeah, it's just you're in control of you.
You know what? Speaking of that
You're
target,
in control, but yet you're a gentleman at the same time. You're not a prick. You're not arrogant. You're not over the
exactly.
top.
Yeah, and speaking of that target, James Bond happened to be a car guy. He had a thing for Aston Martins.
Yeah. I had an Aston back in I think it's 2011 or something, and it's just a piece of garbage. It's a DB9, and it was it was fun
Did
to
you have
look
the
at.
V12 in it?
Yeah, I had the V12.
I came this close to buying a 2008 DBS, the one from
Yeah,
Casino Royale, even in
yeah,
like the same colors, from the film, with like that like
the
metallic
silver.
gray. Oh, it was gorgeous car. Gorgeous car. It was like 120 grand when I was looking at it. They're like well over 220,000. Like, some of these things can really pump up in value, eh?
Yeah, they can't. Well, especially some of the right cars. They're really a store of value, and they can definitely appreciate. That's for sure.
Do you have any cars as like investments right now? Because I mean,
I have a bunch of trucks. I talk
trucks, eh?
about that on my channel all the time. Mid '90s and late
Like
'90s.
Land Rovers?
No, Ford F-250s and 350s with the 7.3 diesel.
Okay.
I've collected a ton of them, and man, they stay really consistent with inflation, and they've appreciated massively over the past 2 or 3
Are
years
those
or
fun to
so.
drive? Like, I mean, I've driven a couple of big diesel trucks, but I always found them just kind of like, I feel like I should have a trailer on them and towing something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would buy it because it's fun to drive. It all depends where you live too. Like right now, I've got one of them up that I'm. Well, it's a long story, but I've got one here in my garage, and I'm in a high-rise condominium building that has valet, and all the parking is underground, and it's a pain in the ass. Trying to park the thing and get it around and stuff, and it's definitely not the McLaren, so I've got to figure out another
Yeah, what's the
daily driver car.
Yeah, what's the scoop on the McLaren? So you got a 570
GT.
GT, which let me see if I can find a picture, because I was actually looking at these too. And 570 GT. And how long you had it?
Just a couple months or so. I bought it when I was in Miami for my live event, and
Yeah.
I kind of go in and out of cars maybe once every 6 months or so. I don't know if I'll still be in the States next year. We'll see how the world looks.
Yeah.
But I just signed a 6-month lease here, so I thought it'd be a fun car to have, and I figured I could just flip it at Barrett
Yeah,
Jackson.
it's a really nice
Illinois.
swoopy looking body design, and it's got a slightly softer suspension. The springs are like 10% softer or something like
Yeah.
that. But it's got the same power as the 570, so it's a rapid car. I mean, I drove the 570.
Yeah, it's really, really quick. There's some quality issues.
Yeah, quality here. We were talking about these, before we went live, and I was talking to you about the Elva, which is this thing over here. A friend of mine just bought this thing.
Wow.
There's no windshield. There's no roof to it. You have to wear helmets. Depending on how you spec it, and this one has a livery paint job. Like, this is not stickers in the car. Like, this is painted that way from the factory.
Yeah.
These things can be upwards of like 1.5, 2 million, 2.5 million, depending on how much you want to spend on it.
Yeah, see, the thing is I always think about, okay, if I'm going to drop
That's
$1
the
million,
LT I was telling you about earlier too. So that's a 765 LT.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're fantastic cars, and they're just wicked fast.
Oh yeah.
I just think I don't want to say that the construction quality is poor, but it's just not as solid as
The
like
fit and
a
finish.
Mercedes. Like we were talking before we went live, there's
Yeah.
like trim pieces that you kind of push and they like wobble a little bit,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
if you get a Mercedes as an example,
Everything's perfect.
everything's just going to
Robots
be,
built it.
yeah, it's just going to be solid. And I had a Gallardo back in the day, and that was fantastic. It was just really put together. But basically, you're buying an Audi with a V10 Lamborghini engine in it. That's what the Gallardo was. And so,
that engine was hand built by Porsche. That contract was sent to Porsche to build the engines.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, for the R8 and for the Gallardo generation. I think leading up to the Huracan. I'm not sure if they still do it for that, but for the R8s and the Gallardos at the time, they were hand built by Porsche. Great engines. I mean, I've got an R8, so I think you already know this. And most of my viewers, I mean, I don't post as many car videos as I used to, but that R8 is also a store of value, right?
That's really been a store of value.
Yeah, like the V10s with the manuals. I saw one that sold on Bring a Trailer the other day for 270,000 for a 2012.
Yeah, any manual, I think, is, if you get like a manual Hellcat or something like that, I think it would be the same thing if you hold on to it for a few years. I had an R8 as well, but I had back prior to the V10, I had a V8.
The V8, yeah, I drove one of those and I found it just wasn't quick enough. But the McLarens are off the chart, eh? Like that thing, it's a freaking spaceship.
It's especially once you get into the power band when the turbos kick in. I mean,
so sick.
Rip your face off fast. I mean, it almost.
Have you ever driven like the 720 or a 765 LT? Have you driven anything? That active aero, with the wing, in the back, how it flips up like that. That thing makes a big difference, man. There's times where you're letting it rip and you see a corner come in, and I look down at the speed. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I'm going that fast?
Yeah.
Slam on the brakes, and it's like somebody throws an anchor out the back, and it's dragging down the road behind you because the wing's up, the carbon ceramics, and you're just doing this shit, fucking shaking all over the place, holding onto the wheel before you get into the corner.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, man, it's the most fun you can have, with your clothes on. People don't understand. When I talk to somebody and they're not a car guy, and they're like, I just can't be bothered. I'm just like, really? Like,
oh no, just give them a ride in the McLaren. That's all you got to do. Just give them one ride in that, and they're like, yeah. They always say, oh, why would you even want that? The speed limit's 55 or whatever. You're like, listen, let me give you a real fast ride around the block, and you will know within seconds why why I bought this car.
Yeah, they're crazy. Let's talk about your channel and the whole red pill economic approach and the way that the government's running things. I've seen hashtag and the Fed around quite a lot on some merch and stuff on your channel. So, like, what's your philosophy right now on the state of the Western economy? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Like, just overall from 30,000 feet.
Well, fundamentally, it's in very bad shape, and it's very similar to a heroin addict in the sense that if you give the heroin addict enough heroin, sure, they can function. They might be able to walk around. They might be able to go to the grocery store, but underneath the skin, they're incredibly unhealthy and maybe very near death. It's all about that heroin, and we've gotten to the same point, especially in the United States, with first quantitative easing, and then with this these government deficits that they've now, $5 trillion, for heaven's sakes, in 2020 alone.
What instrument in the economy would be the heroin? Because I mean, we know the addict is the U.S., right? But what is the actual instrument?
The dollars they're creating out of thin air,
printing out dollars.
You want to say monetary heroin? It's cheap money. It's them sending out stimulus checks to everyone for staying at home and not going to work. This is a monetary drug, whether you want to call it UBI, a welfare state. It's more and more government fiscal spending.
How much are they pumping out monthly to an individual in the U.S. right now?
Oh, it depends on which individuals you're referring to, but I mean, they just every single month it's something else. Rich, they just came out with a child tax credit,
Mhm.
which is a five
We've had
500.
that. We've had that here for a long time. They probably ripped that off our system.
Yeah, but it's not a tax. I mean, they say it's a tax credit, but they're just sending people checks
All
directly
right.
in the mail. Here in the United States, the average income is up almost 20% from where it was in 2019. This was going back to January, February of
Mm.
this year. So you say, how on earth can that be when the economy was locked down, when you have way higher unemployment, you have a lot of people that just refuse to go back to work. So how is that even possible? Well, it's possible when the government just continues to send people stimulus checks or increase their unemployment benefits or give them these child tax deductions. And then also too, on the expense side of the equation, here we had a rent or an eviction moratorium
Mhm.
where you couldn't kick people out. The landlords couldn't kick people out for not paying rent. So you had a lot of people that just said, "Screw it, I'm not going to pay rent."
So
And
you
that
had landlords carrying the burden of running that home while they had a tenant in it, like basically a squatter, not paying rent, and they couldn't do anything about it.
yeah, and then a lot of them had they wouldn't have to pay their mortgage because we had a mortgage forbearance here as well. So
Oh, okay. So that moved on to the homeowners too.
some of them, if you had a loan with Fannie and Freddie, yeah,
Mm.
there are
Wow.
some stipulations there. But you've got the government coming in and creating all of these economic distortions. And what your viewers who might not have, might not be as nerdy as I am when it comes to economics, the thing you just have to understand is that wealth is not a measurement of dollars or of currency. That doesn't matter at all. What wealth is goods and services. It's a society's ability to create goods and services. And if you want an extreme example, just go out to a deserted island with a chest full of $1 million, let's say. How rich are you? You're dirt poor because there's no goods and services, right?
You've got
It
kindling,
doesn't
basically. You have something to start fires with.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much cash you have. In that sense, it wouldn't matter how much gold or Bitcoin or anything you have. There's
Mhm.
no goods and services, for heaven's sakes, right? So when you look at this government, the distortions that they're creating through this deficit spending, you just have to ask yourself the question: okay, is this going to create more goods and services in the future or fewer goods and services? And if it creates fewer goods and services, then by definition, we as a society are becoming more poor. And I mean, let's look at our example, or let's use the two of us, right? My guess is your investment portfolio is larger today, as far as the nominal value, than it was in 2019.
Of
Uh,
course, yeah.
for me, my investment portfolio is substantially larger.
Mhm.
But then you have to ask the question: are you richer today or are you poorer? So let's say this another way. Rich Cooper, do you have access right now in Canada to more goods and services than you did in 2019 or fewer goods and services? Do you have more personal freedom today or less personal freedom
Less
today?
freedom today. Definitely less freedom.
That's right. And then you have access to fewer goods. My guess is it's like here in the United States, it's far harder to get a reservation at a restaurant. You used to be able
Mhm.
to get an Uber in 2 minutes. Now
Mhm.
it takes you 20 minutes if you can even get one. That's if you're lucky.
Mhm.
Try getting a rental car. They're just sold out everywhere.
Mhm.
There's far fewer goods and services. Therefore, even if your portfolio is significantly higher, even if we're getting more income, it doesn't matter. We're just getting these green pieces of paper. At the end of the day, it's about society producing goods and services. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this is a guy I like a lot. His name is Simon Black. He's got a company called sovereignman.com, just to
Mhm.
give him a shout out. But he was talking to this gal that grew up in Soviet Russia, right? And she made a very interesting point that I think kind of goes over a lot of our heads that grew up in the Western world, because we see, Russia, or back in the 70s and 80s, as being very poor. That was a
Mhm.
poor country. But she said that it wasn't, everyone had money. Like, that wasn't the issue. Everybody had money, but there was just no stuff to buy. So you sit there and you see a line, you have to wait in line for 5 hours to get a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And in the US, we associate that with not having enough money. But no, that's not the problem. The problem is there's no goods and services. You see, and that's what the United States is doing right now by not only quantitative easing, but especially they've kicked it into overdrive with this deficit spending that just has gone completely parabolic in 2020, and they'll have to continue to maintain that level because it's like the heroin. Once you start taking that level of heroin, you got to take more and more and more to have the same effect. But the
So what does
problem
the
is,
end look like?
what's that?
What does the end look like? Like how does this end? Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I mean,
Because being a heroin addict is not a solution to life, right? Like that ends at some point, usually quite badly.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it's going to end for the U.S. economy. So you have to have a deleveraging, just like the heroin addict has to get off the drug.
Mm-hmm.
But that time where they go through the withdrawals is very, very difficult, and it's extremely painful. But
what do you recommend guys do today to sort of prepare for that? Like, is it hedging with real estate, gold, Bitcoin?
Well, that's a very broad question. I think that you have to, you've got to buy correctly. You've got to buy things when they're cheap. You've got to sell them when they're expensive. But I think that the things that just the everyday person can do is make sure you've got some gold. And I like to do what I call a 10-80-10 portfolio. So 10% in gold, 80% in assets that pay me to own them, and then 10% in just speculations where I think there's good asymmetry there. Bitcoin would be an example of that. And rental property would be a good example of something that pays me to own it. But the problem right now is you can't just say, well, rental property, because people go out there and buy it in California or Toronto, as an example, and they probably have a negative carry on it.
Well, I have a rental property in Toronto that I've had for, I don't know, since 2014 or something like that.
So do you have positive cash flow?
I do, because I don't owe much on it. But the rents have come down from like $2,950, maybe $3,000 a few years ago to about $2,600. And the value of the property, it's not moved much. I mean, it's pretty static. If anything, with inflation, it's probably a losing bet right now as far as value, but that might change in a few years. I mean, people are moving out of cities, right? That's why there's so many vacancies.
Yeah, well, here rents are going up pretty much everywhere. But see, that's a good example of.
Where do you live? You're in Arizona, right?
Yeah, I'm in Arizona right now. I mean, okay. Who knows where I'll be in 6 months? But I think it's a matter of the deal, and the numbers, and it's not just a blanket statement. Now, back in 2012, you could have said, yeah, just buy real estate. Mm-hmm. It's cheap. Mm-hmm. Today you can't do that, and you have to understand how to utilize debt, because in the United States, as an example, that's really your asset when you're buying real estate. Now it shouldn't be, but unfortunately it is. The debt, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, is your asset, because if we get substantial inflation, which I think we will long term, then you're going to be paying that loan back with devalued dollars. And if you're paying the loan back with devalued dollars, that's a transfer of wealth, purchasing power, from the lender to the borrower. And so I think right now it's the complete opposite that it usually is. Most of the time in a healthy market, the property would be the asset and the mortgage would be the liability. But I think it's flopped to where now the liability is the property, because you're buying at all-time highs, but the asset is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That's where you're going to make your purchasing power that will compensate you from probably your loss of purchasing power that you'll have with the property. And people forget that you can lose purchasing power in real terms, but increase in nominal terms. So as an example, and very few people, especially real estate, because the real estate guys get down in the weeds about the real estate, but they forget about macro. And so let's say you go out and buy a $100,000 property, and it goes up in nominal price by 5% per year. And you say, well, wow, I'm getting rich. Well, not if we've got 10% inflation, you're not, because now in real terms, you're losing 5% per year compounded. So you take that out, let's say 8 years at a 5% real loss, even though at a 5% nominal gain, and now the value of that home and purchasing power has been cut in half. And so that's what why
A lot
I
of people
say,
don't pay attention to those details, though. They just look well past them because they fall for the marketing crap, right? Like, oh, you're richer than you think. Just go and borrow, and we'll throw you in this thing, and you'll be wealthy in a few years. And most people don't understand like the deep dynamics. Like there's a red pill with money. There's red pill in relationship. Like it's basically the uncomfortable truth about stuff that's peeled back behind the surface. People are
yeah,
very
but
surface oriented, man.
yeah, but I think you hit the nail on the head there. And if you, I know that that's kind of a blanket term, red pill, and it gets way overused, but the concept is the same. Is that we, whether it's with relationships, men and women, we've been lied to for a long time. The way that they tell you the world works is not the way it works in reality, and it's the exact same thing with economics and investing. The way you were told it works, that's completely irrelevant. You're whistling by the graveyard, so to speak. And if you want to take that economic or investing red pill, you're going to go through the same process as you went through by taking the red pill and looking at the opposite sex and relationships. It's going to be a struggle because of how you've been conditioned to view the world. And we've been conditioned to view wealth as currency units, as pieces of paper. And that is completely inaccurate. Just ask Venezuelans how wealthy they are, because if you look at their nominal wealth, they're the wealth. Every single person's a trillionaire, but of course they're dirt poor.
But in a currency that has no value.
That's right. That's right. So and once people start going down that path, then they start to see how things truly are. And then that, like being red pilled in anything else, is kind of like having a sixth sense, and it's a huge edge, massive edge.
You said that you're only temporarily there, so I take it that you move around a lot. Like, is there a place in the world that you like sort of fancy, or you just kind of like go where the wind takes you?
Yeah, I like Medellin, Colombia. I've been investing in real estate there since 2015. And I've got an operation there. The climate's fantastic. The people are great. The food is amazing. The cost of living is it's just, I love Medellin. Unfortunately, it's not the place you want to be right now because of the lockdowns and the restriction. Well, it's not the place you want to be if you enjoy personal freedom and liberty.
Oh, why they locked down the country?
I got stuck in a lockdown there, and it was very draconian. Okay. And according to my employees, they're still making you wear masks in grocery stores, and they're kind of haphazard.
It's the same thing here, though, right? I mean, like, you can't even sit down in a restaurant today and have a meal. I mean, you can sit outside on a patio with 4 people, but that's it.
Well, see, that's why I'm in Arizona.
Yeah, there's a lot more freedom there in Arizona, Texas, Florida.
I don't want to put up with that. Yeah. I don't want to put up with that. So fortunately, I've got the resources and the lifestyle to where if wherever's where I'm going to get the most personal freedom, that's where I'm going. Whether it's
what's your take on this whole beer bug thing?
Well, I think that initially you didn't know what the hell was going on. So you had to sit there and say, okay, we need to look at the data. We need to look at the R naught value.
That's exactly what I did for the first 3 months. I'm like, okay, let's see the numbers come in. Let's see what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. But I even at the height of my concern, and this was way before the normies, let's say, got concerned. I'm talking about January, February of 2020. Not April. I was concerned then, but even back then, when I would go on podcasts, I'd say, listen, we need to be concerned with this, but the one thing we don't want to do is get the government involved. The government needs to allow people to make their own decisions. If you want to stay inside, you go ahead and stay inside. What we don't want is the government coming in and locking people in their own house at gunpoint, or taking their businesses away. and doing all of these draconian measures, because once they
You want a big fat red
power,
pill
they're never get back.
on people and humanity and society. I was watching the show on Netflix, basically about psychopath leaders around the world. I can't remember what it was called, but one of the things they said in it that really stood out is that human beings love being ruled. And I was like, oh shit. I had to like rewind that for 15 seconds and then play it back. I'm like, he's right. People love being ruled. Like they want a fucking ruler. And it's just bizarre to me, man. Because I mean, like, it just doesn't feel right. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I look around the world today, and there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of things to be concerned with. And at some point in time, we're going to have to pay the economic fiddler. And I don't know how much further they can kick the can down the road. The problem is,
you feel like it's, you know, it's supposed to collapse at some time, though, right? Like you're like, you know, really, like it's still going down the road.
Well, there's that saying that the market can remain irrational way longer than you can remain solvent.
Yeah, you're right.
And so, but see, the thing is, though, just because they can kick the can down the road doesn't mean that you should bet that way. Bet as though they're going to be able. It's like blackjack. You know, when I first started playing blackjack, I was doing it to help train my kind of investing mind to think in terms of probabilities. So you sit there and you've got two people at a blackjack table. Let's say I'm paying with someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and they've got a 19 and they're going to hit because they think they're on fire, right? And I'm like, oh, no, you don't want to do that. That's not a good play. You want to stay on
3 2s in the last like 10 seconds.
Yeah, and like, oh, George, you're fear mongering. You know, I'm on fire here. And let's say they hit and they get a 2. You know, did they do the right thing or the wrong thing? And I would always argue they did the wrong thing, because if they continue to bet that way, they're going to go bust. And it's the exact same thing today with buying stocks or certain assets that are in massive, massive bubbles. That yes, the bubble can continue, but it doesn't mean that you're making the right investment decision by buying now. Just because your portfolio goes up doesn't necessarily mean that you did the right thing. You could have just gotten lucky. You could be a part of a bubble, because even if you think you made money in the short term, if you continue with that strategy, you do not have an edge. You have a negative edge, and at some point you're going to lose.
What do you think about cryptocurrency, DeFi, and Bitcoin specifically?
Well, I think that they're very good speculations. Some of them, some things can be, but you have to realize that it's a speculative asset, and it's going to be very volatile for, you know, at some point, if the whole world is using Bitcoin as global money, then yes, it won't be as volatile. But you got a long way to go to get to that point. And I think that people need to really compartmentalize the probabilities of Bitcoin going to X price. Let's say your price target's 100,000, and then the probabilities of Bitcoin becoming global money, because those are two completely separate questions.
I don't think it's money. I feel like it's a store of value. I think Michael Saylor got it right when he called it digital real estate.
Well, it might be digital real estate, but it's wildly volatile right now. So my point is, and then how see, the tough thing about Bitcoin is how do you value it, right? And I think that it's very difficult to know when it's cheap, quote unquote, and when it's expensive. And that's the very first question that I always ask myself. I never, if I could give your audience one piece of advice, it's to never worry about the price direction. Now, that's what most people think about first. Well, what's the price going to do? Well, don't worry about it. Just ask yourself if it's cheap or if it's expensive. And if it's cheap, buy it. If it's expensive, sell it. You're not going to pick all the tops and all the bottoms. But if you continue with that mindset, again, going back to probabilities, that's an edge. So how do you determine if Bitcoin is cheap? I don't know. But what I try to do is look at the market sentiment. Right. So you see like the Google searches just going parabolic when it gets up to, it was just up to 60,000 or whatever its peak was, 65,000, something like that. And then you see every single person on CNBC talking about it. And, you get in your Uber driver and they're talking about it. I had my housekeepers come over.
When your
And
housekeeper
they were
starts
talking
talking about it,
about
it's
Bitcoin. They were talking about Bitcoin.
that's
So
when you start selling some off and taking profits.
or at least you're not buying. You know, what I like to do is I like to have a long-term macro view, but then I like to just create kind of a watch list, right? And it doesn't mean that I have to go out there and buy everything that I'm bullish on long-term.
Mhm.
You know, copper would be a good example of that.
I do like the volatility though. Like I'll be honest with you. I mean, you know, if you're in and out and you know what you're doing, like it's good. You know, it's
You,
good for you.
yeah, I think so. But as long as you compartmentalize it in your portfolio and
Yeah.
understand what purpose it serves, what most people do is they don't think about portfolio construction at all. They don't think about risk reward. They just sit there and look at assets and then ask themselves, okay, do I think that's going to go up in price? Yes. Okay, I buy it. What about that thing? I think that's going to go up in price. Yeah, I'm going to buy that too. They don't understand how the two assets behave together in a portfolio over the long run. You know, example I can give to you, Rich, is an example I got from my good buddy Chris Cole, who is the author of the Dragon Portfolio. He runs a hedge fund called Artemis Capital that specializes in volatility. And he put it better than anyone I've ever heard. He said, listen, you can have a team of 5 Michael Jordans, let's say, and you're not going to win as many championships as if you have a team with a Michael Jordan and a Dennis Rodman.
Mm-hmm.
You see, Dennis Rodman, no one would ever buy or go long a Dennis Rodman by himself because he couldn't make a shot outside 2 feet, right? So no one would ever look at that asset and say, oh my gosh, I've got to buy myself a Dennis Rodman because that price is really, really, really going to go through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
No, they'd have 5 Michael Jordans, you see. But over the long run, the portfolio, or in this case, the basketball team, with not only Michael Jordan, but with Dennis Rodman, is going to perform better than the team with all Michael Jordans.
What about Scottie Pippen? He never
Or
got
Scottie
any mention.
Pippen, or any of the other guys, Steve Kerr, you know, that kind of made up that team.
Yeah.
And so that's what people have to understand with their investments in their portfolio. It's the exact same thing.
I agree.
They need to understand portfolio construction and not just try to figure out each asset within the portfolio if it's going up or down in price.
What do you think of decentralized finance? Do you think this is something that's going to displace the financial institutions today?
I think it's got its place, and I wish it would. Philosophically, I'm all about it. But again, it's a matter of probabilities. And if you look at the way the system functions right now, the global monetary system, and you know, I could go into this for the next 3 hours, but you've got the commercial banks that have been in control of the creation of currency, dollars, for a long, long time, many, many decades. They're the ones that create new currency units by lending them into existence. So if you get a loan for $1 million, those $1 million did not exist before. The bank created those out of thin air. So this process of how money is created globally, when you think of the dollar being the reserve currency, gets incredibly esoteric and very complex. And it's a lot of it is done in the shadows where you really can't see it. But the whole thing is just basically a ledger system. That's all it is a ledger system. And I think that you could come up with a decentralized ledger system, you know, obviously with blockchain or Bitcoin, you know, the people would point to that and say, well, there you go, it already exists. You could create something like that would, I think, would be superior to what we have today, a superior ledger system. And again, I want to reiterate that the entire global monetary system, all it is a big ledger system. That's it. Even the central banks, that's all they have is just an electronic ledger, and they just obey those specific rules that where all the banks agree that you have as much purchasing power as your bank account says you do. Because at the end of the day, it's just an electronic scoreboard, just like basketball teams playing, right? So I don't want to get too far into the weeds there, but philosophically, I hope it does work out.
It
And
solves a lot of problems, and it gives you a lot more control and freedom. That's for sure.
well, to the individual, that's right, but
Yeah.
it solves problems beyond your wildest, what you can even conceive. Because in order to explain how the Eurodollar system works, or the international banking cartel, or how dollars are created with the Federal Reserve, that would take the next, that take hours and hours and hours. But that centralized ledger system that we have right now is completely broken, and the global economy will not function again on all 8 cylinders until we fix it. And it's been broken since 2008.
Yeah, and nobody, well, not nobody, but the vast majority of the population doesn't realize it's broken, because if they did, they would all move to the blockchain and decentralized finance, and it would just kind of collapse on itself. But I think what's going to happen is it's going to have to let people down, and they're going to be left with no other option but blockchain, Bitcoin, DeFi technology.
Yeah, so I talked to Robert Breedlove, about that the other day, because we always kind of try to figure out the end game. At my event, the last panel discussion we had was with myself, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, and Robert Breedlove, where we tried to kind of think through what this end game looks like, right?
Mhm.
Like if we had a collapse in fiat currency.
Did you have an agreement on that?
What's that?
Did you guys come to an agreement on that?
No. Breedlove. So we said, okay, if fiat currency collapses tomorrow, then what do we do? Because everyone agrees that the global governments would have to instill confidence. So then the question becomes how. And my answer was, okay, if it happens tomorrow, then I think they would instill confidence with gold. Because it's just been the go-to for the last 5,000 years.
Mm.
But if this system collapses in 10 years, and let's say at that point in time, Bitcoin is being used by such a much larger
Well, I think
percentage
the gold
of the
market's
global
what, it's
population.
10 trillion.
What's that?
I think the gold market, comes to about 10
Yeah,
trillion, and
about
Bitcoin,
10, and Bitcoin was up to about 1. Probably now it's
yeah, so like 1/10 of that. So you're right. Yeah,
well, it's a lot
it would
lower
definitely be
now.
gold. Yeah.
Yeah, but people have that familiarity with gold
Mhm.
at scale, and not as many people do with Bitcoin. But my point was, in 5 years or 10 years, then
Could
I could have
change.
a different answer based on how the adoption has gone with Bitcoin, not just as a store of value, but maybe even from a transactional standpoint.
Mm.
And then, so Snyder, who's the smartest guy on this topic I've ever seen, he kind of said, we don't know, that we would want to have a market solution, but does it exist right now? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there has to be some tweaks, some changes made. But he thought that what we would get in 5 to 10 years is not going to be what we have today, because technology will advance so far.
Mhm.
Breedlove, who I think would consider himself a Bitcoin maximalist, thought that the answer would be Bitcoin, and that's what the private sector would gravitate towards. And then Brent Johnson said he couldn't even imagine what would happen if the fiat currency system crashed or collapsed right now. But he said that we would have to think of a market-based solution if we want a long-term. It can't be centralized again, because he thinks that's where the loss of confidence is going to be, not just with the currency, but with the government and with the global elite themselves.
Mhm.
And so now, whether that's Bitcoin or something else, he doesn't know. But it's a very interesting thought experiment.
What percentage of the government would you just cleave off right now? Like if you had, 100%, you wanted to cleave off some of it to, like, cut off some of the fat. How much of it would you get rid of?
Well, I'd take us back down to where we were prior to the Fed. So if you think about that in terms of GDP, prior to the Fed, the government represented about 5% of GDP. Government spending represented about 5% of GDP. That means that the private sector represented 95%. And as pretty much everyone on this live stream or that watches this video, I think whether you're on the right or the left, you would agree that government is for the most part, much less efficient than the private sector. So you think about if the private sector is in control, let's say, of 95% of the economy, government 5%. Now the government spending is almost 60% of GDP in the United States. That means the private sector is only responsible for 40%. So think about that in terms of efficiencies or lack thereof. So I would want to take it back to where government spending was 5% of GDP.
A lot to unpack with that. Let's get into a couple of these super chats here because some have popped in before Moody Millennial, George is a real deal. Friend of yours?
Oh, I think he's on my live streams all the time. That's the character that I use in my whiteboard videos.
Okay. Michael J says, I have a great business idea that can be monetized so many ways, but I have no idea how to start. Okay, here we go. I know I need help and no compete disclosure contract. I need help finding the right help networking advice. I have advice on this. I want to hear you, George, so but go ahead, chime in.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get the paralysis of analysis, and I would just get up and do it. I think so many people get hyper focused on setting up LLCs and S corps and asset protection
and non-competes and sign this contract.
And listen, I agree that at some point you want to cross that bridge, but you got far bigger fish to fry, my friend.
Like making money. That's the point of a business, to make money.
Yeah, so I see real estate investors do this all the time, or they'll sit there and they'll spend $20,000 on setting up all these elaborate LLCs, and you'll ask them how many properties they have, and they'll say, well, I haven't bought one yet.
But I have a great idea that can be monetized and it'll blow up, George.
I'm ready. Yeah, and so I always encourage them to buy the property first.
Yeah.
And learn, use it as an experience, and then worry about the LLC maybe 10th or 12th or 15th down the list. That shouldn't be your biggest priority. But so my point, Michael, is work on your business. I don't know what it is, but let's go out to investors. Let's get these things going. I wouldn't be so. I don't want to tell anybody this because they're going to steal my idea. Because let me tell you what, an idea is worth basically zero. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but what's most important is the execution. You can have the best idea ever, and it's not going to come to fruition. It's all about execution. So, so what if someone steals your idea? They'd still have to execute. And let's use Rich's channel as an example. Okay, I had this great idea. I'm going to start a YouTube channel that talks about cars and red pill and relationships and all these things. That's my great idea. Oh, okay. But what's important is how you execute. And so there, when Rich started his channel, there could have been 10 other channels that had the same type of idea, the same type of content, but Rich executed. He did it the right way, and so that's why he's here long term. And it's the same thing with a business. Focus more on the execution and less on the idea.
That's very, very good advice. I co-sign all of that. How much time you got, though? By the way, I forgot to ask you at the start. We're at the 60-minute.
It's up to you.
I can go for another 30. You good for another 30?
Yeah.
All right. Let me ask you this question. So, what's something that you wish men today would understand? Like, if you could have a sit down, with guys and provide some clarity on something that you see men commonly do wrong.
Well, boy, as far as their investments or just in life in general?
Generalize it. Or is investments the biggest problem, right? I mean, is there something really big there that they're not paying attention to that's in their blind spot?
Well, I think it's where your focus is. And people and guys have to understand that your focus should be being I'm going to use your term, the best version of yourself. And whether it's finances, whether it's fitness, whether it's your mental state, that needs to be, everything needs to revolve around that. Because once you've got that squared away, the rest falls into place. It really does. And so many guys kind of are chasing things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. They're out there chasing women, as an example. And if they would just take that same energy and allocate it to chasing something else, to improving themselves, then they would get both. Then they would have the money, they would have the lifestyle, they would have the personal freedom, which is, at the end of the day, is what it's all about. But then you would also have a significant amount of success with women, or with other relationships. Whether it's hanging out with people that you respect and enjoy, communicating with. Let's look at my podcast as an example. I could have sat there and focused on 100 different things, but because I sat and focused on expanding my own knowledge and creating content and trying to seek out other individuals that were a lot smarter than I was, that I could learn from and improve my own skills, now all of a sudden I've got the opportunity to set up this live event, to talk to you. I've met Rolo, was out at my live event. I got to meet him personally. So you get all of these opportunities by going out there and just making it happen on your own. And if I would have, if I would have gone the other direction, I don't think I would have had, I wouldn't have been able to have the success that I have in so many different areas. I guess that's the best way that I can put. That's probably the best advice I could give them.
There's some gems in there. Jeremiah says, my advice to men under 40: stop valuing women and they will value you. Learn a skill, spend all your money on starting the business, exactly like he said.
Yeah,
and be careful with all your money starting a business. I like to bootstrap businesses. I mean, my view on it is, if you can't get it off the ground bootstrapped, then there's no point.
Yeah, and you've got to there's so many things that I've learned over the years.
Like selling the farm to start a business, I just don't ever think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I was talking to I was having dinner with Robert and Kim Kiyosaki the other day, and they were telling me that one of the things that they learned at a very early age from a mentor that they had was, if you should be making money off of other people's money. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, the only reason you're not is because you're too lazy. Mm-hmm. That's exactly how they phrased it, right? So I think that the access, especially in today's world, the access to startup capital is just almost limitless. So I don't think that should be what you're most concerned with. It's going back to that execution and figuring out what gives you that edge, and then going out there and doing it. Just do it. Prove the concept, and then take the plan, and then go to someone who might be able to, or would even be interested in financing the project. It's just, guys and gals, the entrepreneurs, that they a lot of times they get things in reverse and they just get in their own way. But another thing on that note, though, is that I would want men and women to realize is that to be successful, you have to be willing to sacrifice things that other people are not willing to sacrifice. That's the bottom line. That's the only way to get ahead in the world, is you've got to get out there and hustle. And if you want to achieve, let's say you want to be in the top 5% of men, you have to be willing to sacrifice what those other 95% were not willing to sacrifice. And there is no, what do they call it? Cheat code. That's the term you use all the time.
Cheat code to life.
There is no cheat code. There's no cheat code to making money. There's no cheat code to this. I mean, again, using your YouTube channel, how many hundreds or thousands maybe of videos.
How much hate I get for talking about stuff like that? It's unbelievable, man. Like, I get a lot of hate from guys like, he's a snake oil salesman. He's making shit up. He's just trying to sell you something. It's like, nope. I'm just spitting facts, my friends.
That is absolutely true. I mean, you look at any type of success that I had, and it's because what I was willing to sacrifice, and the 80-hour constant, I mean, never taking a day off, the work ethic, the focus, the OCD, it's the willingness to take risk. I mean, very few people are most people would rather just go have a 9-to-5 gig and take weekends off and have their whole life planned for them. It doesn't. It's a rare breed that actually wants the
You got
type
to be
of
a little bit crazy to start a business.
a lot crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that you have to be the complete opposite of a good investor. And that's one thing that I had to learn when I retired, was that because entrepreneurs see opportunity in everything.
Yeah.
Where a good investor should see risk in everything. And I had to learn that the hard way. But once it dawned on me, it made a lot of sense. And I'm like, George, when you're investing, you got to take your entrepreneurial hat off because they don't blend.
Yeah. Did I ever talk to you about the differences between playing to win and playing not to lose?
No.
So,
but that's a good way to look at entrepreneurship and investing.
yeah, basically, like I had this retreat, and there was about 8 of us together, and it was facilitated by the guy that was one of the founders of Entrepreneurs Organization. Like he was a former president and CEO, but he had this guy down in my group, and he said something to him that just like never went away from it. He said, in life as an entrepreneur, you're either playing to win or you're playing not to lose. And he goes, you, my friend, are a racehorse giving pony rides, which is basically, playing not to lose, which is fine. Like you can play not to lose when you've acquired your wealth. Like you're 40, 50 years old, you've made a ton of money, you're playing more on the defense.
Yeah. So I'd say an investor should play not to lose, because the number one rule is don't lose money.
Investor plays not to lose, a entrepreneur plays to win.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Awesome. I love chopping that up, man. That's I don't know if that would have come out if we didn't get into that. Christopher Rowbottom says, what are your thoughts on the British Columbia, Canada housing market? You always hear about the bubble breaking. The laws favor the renter to a point that seems to risk the investment. As a holder of real estate in Canada myself, I'm not big on it. I think I'm going to start to unload, to be honest with you.
Well, you just have to ask yourself if it's cheap or if it's expensive.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything cheap about Canadian real estate right now.
No. Like,
that answers again.
I'll give you an idea, George. So you tell me what they go for in Arizona, but like here in downtown Toronto in the core, you're going to be paying about $900,000 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, just under 800 square feet, and you get a parking spot and a storage locker, which is like 6 by 6, basically. It's a little
right. But so let's say $1 million. So what can you rent it out for?
2,700.
See, that is horrible.
Right.
That is absolutely atrocious. Now, if you could rent that out for $10,000 a month, now you got a 1% RV ratio.
Right.
That's not bad. But see, my point is that last viewer, he's focusing on exactly what I'm talking about.
It was this guy here.
See, what question is he trying to answer? He's trying to answer, is the price going to go up or down? That's what I'm sorry, Christopher. I don't want to, this is a good question. I'm glad you asked it. But this is the point I'm making. You're trying to figure out if prices are going up or down. I'm saying I would suggest not doing that. I would suggest forgetting about what direction the price is going and just ask yourself if it's cheap. And if it's not cheap, don't buy it. And if it's expensive, sell it. That's it. Don't worry about which direction the price is going.
You've talked about prices crashing up.
Yeah.
Can you clarify that for the viewers? Because I don't think we've talked about it on my channel yet.
Yeah. So let's say you buy a place in Canada for $1 million, and it goes up by like we were saying 5% per year. But if inflation goes up at 10% per year, you're actually losing purchasing power, even though the nominal price of the asset is going up. And that's another reason why you'd want to secure real estate with 30-year fixed rate debt. And I know if that's not an option in Canada, well, then just buy it in the U.S. It's super easy for Canadians to invest in the U.S. But again, the numbers have to be right. Going back to that RV ratio, most people, they take that $1 million, they get 2,600. That's a 2.6%, or excuse me, a 0.2% to a 0.26% RV ratio. So the RV ratio is the amount of gross rent you're getting based on your cost basis. So that's terrible when you could take that same $1 million and buy 10 $100,000 homes, let's say, at a 1% RV ratio and get $10,000 a month. So that's what I'm saying, that you've got to look at things in those terms. And going back to March of 2020, which is when I most recently bought the most amount of equities. I thought back then that oil was going to continue to go down in price because it was about 20 or 25 a barrel. And but I wanted to play by my own rules, and I went heavy and bought a massive amount of not only oil producers, but a lot of commodity producers at the time. Now, but I thought that the price was still going down, but I still bought. Why? Because it was cheap. It was cheap. When you look at a historic chart adjusted for inflation, that's where you've got to start. And if you look at the housing market in BC or in Canada in a chart going back 40 or 50 years, adjusted for inflation, I can promise you're at all-time highs. And I know that by just looking at the rent and the RV ratio that you just told me. That's extremely expensive. So that's the best advice I can give to that person.
But I mean, a lot of guys out there have the notion that you must acquire real estate to be anybody, right?
Well,
so they'll fight tooth and nail to do whatever they can to acquire real estate. A lot of it, I see a lot of guys in relationships with women. Like, I've had renters in and out of my condo.
Yeah.
It's like whenever they leave, it's always because they get pregnant and she wants to buy a place. One or the other, or a combination of both?
Yeah, well, now you're talking about household formation, and that takes us back to a conversation that we've had before, an even deeper conversation about where this is headed from a standpoint of demographics. And again, if you want to get fixated on the price, which I don't think you should, but you got to start thinking about those demographics and the trends. And the thing that the guys on this channel who are quote unquote red pilled, they have a huge advantage that I don't even think they understand. They have an economic advantage because they understand demographics a lot better than most economists. And what I mean by that is that you guys talk about the Pareto distribution, where 20% of the guys are dating 80% of the women, but that Pareto distribution, in my opinion, is shrinking. To where now it's like 95% of the women want to date like 5% of the guys. And so you've got, and then you guys talk about hypergamy all the time. And with women, increasing their education levels and making more and more money, that means that there's fewer and fewer guys that are acceptable to them. Whether that they're justified or not, that's another conversation.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
So what this means is fewer and fewer babies being born and less household formation. Well, that means less population over the long run, and population problems like we've seen in Japan. That's hugely deflationary, especially for asset prices. So that's not a prediction. That's just to say that that's one of the cross currents that we have to consider when we're thinking about real estate, when we're thinking about the future of the Western economy in and of itself, and that guys and gals who are quote unquote red pilled in what you and Rollo talk about, I think they've got a big advantage that, like I said, that they don't even realize, because they, I think, have a better, they can predict the probabilities of population changes a lot better than most people can.
Yeah. Jeremiah says, I agree. 39, single, 23-year-old girlfriend with no kids. Who knows? There is no marriage contract coming. I say yes, except I'm building a full-service plumbing business. The first 10 years is brutal. Great show today. Thank you, both of you. Thanks, man.
Yeah, so I agree. 39, single. So he's 39. His girlfriend's 23 with no kids.
And he doesn't sound like he's getting married. I said I'd say yes, except I'm building. Well, it sounds like he's chasing excellence, not women. So good for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think
focused on the business.
Yeah, he's doing exactly what you need to do, and just don't get one-itis. I mean, if the gal's great, then she's great. Keep her in your inner circle. but just get fixated on, pursuing the best in pursuing the business, pursuing wealth, becoming a better person in general, and personally and professionally. But the thing is, that's what you're going to need to do to keep the relationship healthy anyway. Then that's what most guys, they get turned around while they get in that relationship, and they think that what they need to do to maintain a healthy relationship or a fun relationship is just tell the gal she's good looking 24 hours a day, tell her you love her 5 times a day, buy her flowers, and do all these things. And they just don't understand that may work for a month or two, but if you're not out there creating wealth and having that ambitious attitude and chasing excellence, the gal's not going to respect you, and it's just a matter of time before the relationship deteriorates, in my opinion.
Well said. Stay Curious wants you to come around here more often, my friend.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it's great to talk about these concepts. I like just learning from people in general that know more than I do about a variety of topics, and that's
what's been your biggest takeaway watching my channel? Because I mean, you've said a few times that you've watched quite a bit of the stuff.
I've got a lot of takeaways from watching your stuff, Rich. I mean, we've talked about my main takeaways, but I think you're just a great example of what the opportunity is out there, and I think you should be, kind of motivational or inspirational to people watching your channel, because you came from the blue pill side, and you didn't allow that. You didn't stay in that rut. Once you recognized that there was a deficiency in your thinking, you did everything you possibly could to change it and become better, right? And then I don't know, would you start your YouTube channel like 6 years ago, 5 years ago?
2014, May 23rd, 2014.
Yes, like 6 years ago, and you just kept working on it and working on it. Not only the YouTube channel, but improving your understanding of how the world works.
Everything.
Yeah. And look at how I would assume that now you don't have as much of a struggle with dating, or I don't know that you ever did, but I would assume that now you have far less struggles with dating than you did prior to starting the YouTube channel. And but I would assume that in every aspect of your life is probably better than it was prior to starting that YouTube channel, because you have tried to increase your knowledge, improve yourself, and you practice what you preach.
You got to be curious as a man. I mean, you really do.
Yeah, but I think that's what makes your content great, is because you practice what you preach, and people can see that, and they can see the results that you've obtained for your own life, and they know that it's possible. And I think that's what's so inspirational.
So stay curious, my friends. Let's get to winding this down. Who should be watching your channel, George?
Who should be watching it? People who want to have an edge in predicting economic probabilities in the future, and people who viscerally understand that there are risks out there that are underneath the surface. They see the Federal Reserve quote unquote printing money. They see all these stimulus checks go out, and they're like, something doesn't seem right here. I don't know what it is, but something doesn't seem right. And I either want to increase my wealth in the future, or I want to preserve my current amount of purchasing power. But I know that there are a lot of risks out there that I don't even understand. And I need to understand those risks so I can make better financial decisions for my future. That's the type of person that would really benefit from my channel, I think.
There you go, guys. Let's do this one last super chat. Dukas says, I have a startup, 30,000 net every month or sell it by 1.5 million to invest. I have a startup, 30,000 net every month or sell it. So I think he's asking whether he should sell it or continue to earn the money. I need to decide.
1.5?
Yeah, it's a pretty big multiple on 30K a
I
month.
was going to say I'd sell that thing yesterday. If you can get that multiple, I said that's a home run, man. Just take the money and run.
I need to decide until the end of the year. Maybe I'm getting lazy because I want to invest and get dividends. He's 28 years old. I'd concur with George. I mean, like, unless you have like major upside in the next 24 months, pretty guaranteed.
But even if you sell, the owner should want to keep you around in some capacity to where you still have equity, to where you could participate in the upside there, assuming that you started the business. And this brings up a good point, though, and another piece of investment advice that I give people is I think the first thing that you should do is try to cover your monthly expenses through passive income, if you can do it. Right. So I talked to a lot of business owners and, like, what should I do with my cash? What should I do with my cash? Because a lot of them, they get a much higher return on their investment if they just dump it back into the business, but yet they feel as though they're not diversified. Right. And that makes a lot of sense. And I always say, listen, take profits and just buy stuff that pays you to own it, whether it's dividend paying stocks or real estate that's good, positive cash flow with good numbers. And it doesn't have to be in the US, it can be other places. But let's say your monthly nut's 10 or 15 grand. Okay, well, go out and invest in enough stuff to where you've got that 10 or 15 grand coming in per month from passive investments, and then go ahead and take the money, that your cash flow, and allocate it to where you're getting the highest return. And I think that if people did that, especially entrepreneurs that have been successful and are successful, that moving forward they'd have a willingness to take a lot. Well, I don't want to say they'd have a willingness to take more risk, but they'd have a willingness to take smart risk in the future that they might not otherwise have because of this fear of loss. When we start off, all we see is opportunity. We just want the opportunity. But once you've made a bit of money, then you start to get in that camp where I think you have a fear of losing what you've already earned and what you've already made, instead of just seeing nothing but opportunity in the future when you don't have a pot to piss in.
Sounds like he's a SaaS business. Yeah, it's interesting because SaaS, for those of you that don't know, is software as a service. Many of them have no monthly revenue. It can sell for stupid multiples. I think, what was it? It was Instagram that sold for $1 billion, like within 36 months of startup, and it didn't really have any revenue. Like, stuff like that does happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great multiple. I don't know the business, but again, if I was in this person's shoes, what I would be doing, even if I didn't sell the business, my first priority would be taking my money and buying enough assets that pay me to own them to where it covers my monthly nut, and then take all the excessive cash flow and dump it back into the business.
There you have it, guys. So on that note, we'll wrap up. Go subscribe to George Gammon's YouTube channel. He has a podcast show called The Rebel Capitalist. You also do a conference. What's the conference called again?
Rebel Capitalist Live.
Rebel Capitalist Live. So you can check that all out off his YouTube and his website as well. So thanks for joining us, George. Go subscribe. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk to you for a minute after we get off, but we'll see you guys.